Hi everyone, Kristina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be showing you 3 cards that have essentially the same design, but with different elements used on each card. And I'm going to share with you some tips and tricks on creating a batch of cards like this on your own. So I'm going to be using new products from Simon Says Stamp. This is a release that just came out. So I'll be using these 4 brand new products. They're all kind of nautical themed, with the exception of the thanks frame. That's pretty generic. But the other 3 really scream like nautical or at sea vibes. That's what I'm getting from them. And since I go on a lot of cruises, I need thank you cards for the crew members on the cruise ships. So this is perfect. I'm going to show you the sketch for all 3 of these cards first. You'll notice that all 3 have the same essential design, but just the patterns are switched up on each one. So I've taken some notes, kind of thought out some different color combinations. So I'm going to be using a bunch of cardstock. I'm using Nautical and Paradise from Hero Arts. I'm also going to be using some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White. And then to bring in some shine, I'm going to be using a gold foil cardstock from Alta New. I used that in my last video, so I'm using a scrap that's left over. I'm going to be using some Neenah Environmental Desert Storm cardstock, and then also some chestnut cardstock from Hero Arts. So this is my color palette for all 3 cards. I'm starting out by cutting the card bases, which are 4 1/4 by 11 inches tall. And then I'm going to take each one of these card bases and score them at 5 1/2 to create top folding cards. I'm doing all of these things at the same time. So I'm creating all 3 card bases at the same time. I'm doing each of these steps in batches, and it makes creating cards like this super easy and fast. So after I had all the card bases prepared, I'm now going to use the A2 layers dies from Waffle Flower. And I'm going to take the size that's, I think it's the 5th die in, and I'm going to cut out 3 of these, 1 for each card. I'm using that Paradise cardstock from Hero Arts, and then I've got some of that nautical cardstock, that navy blue shade, and then the white. And I'm going to be creating patterns on each one of these. Before I get to the patterns on those panels, I'm going to prepare the greetings. So I'm taking the Simon Says Stamp Thanks Frame dies, and I'm going to first die cut the part that says thanks, and I'm going to cut it out twice out of this gold foil cardstock from Alta New. And I'm going to use a craft pick just to punch those out. Since that frame is very dainty, you want to be very careful when you're pulling it out because you don't want to warp it too much. But of course, when you adhere it to your card, you can fix that, but just preventing is a good idea. So I have 2 of those cut out of the gold and then 1 cut out using the white cardstock. And then I use the solid rectangle shape and I cut it out of Paradise cardstock, and also I cut it out of the nautical cardstock, and then I have some white. So I'm going to assemble all of these greetings while I've got them out right here. And I thought I would just mention how I did that. I took some Gina K Designs Connect glue and I dabbed little dots over each area on these die cuts and going around that frame. Then I pounced it onto some scratch paper just to get rid of any excess glue that would kind of squidge out from underneath. And then I can put that directly onto that solid rectangle die cut. I'm using tweezers to get these perfectly in place. So I'm going to press that down, make sure it's nice and secure. Then I'm going to grab the thanks die cut and do the same thing, putting dabs of glue on the back, and then I'll pounce it onto some scratch paper, lift it back up, and then bring it over to the finished piece. If you're having trouble getting positioning of the thanks, you could take the negative area that I'm not using. You could place that inside, puzzle piece it in, and then put the thanks in, and then remove that other piece. So I'm using the Anchors background stamp from Simon. I'm using it inside a Misty tool. So I've removed the foam inside the Misty stamp positioning tool. And then I'm using the Creative Corners to get that cardstock in the right position. I've used an anti-static powder tool to prep the area for embossing, and then I'm stamping the Anchors background stamp in Versamark ink. I want these anchors to be a nice bright gold shade, so I'm going to be first stamping them in Versamark and then adding some embossing powder. So I have a really good impression using that big stamp. And I'm going to take some gilded embossing powder from Brutus Monroe and just sprinkle that over all of those anchors. There were a couple spots that stuck around, so I made sure to wipe those clean before using my heat tool to heat set and get these anchors smooth and melted. So after I finished heating all that up, I set it aside and I moved on to the Paradise, or the teal colored panel. I'm using the Waves background stamp from Simon for this. And I'm doing the same exact steps where I prepped it with an anti-static powder tool, stamped the background in Versamark, and then this time I'm applying some white embossing powder. Now the waves, because they're so spread apart, sometimes you can get a little bit of stamping in areas in between the waves. So I used a dry brush just to brush that embossing powder away. I'm using alabaster embossing powder, by the way. I'm now taking the Nautical Stripe stencil from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to prep the back of this stencil with some Thermo Web Pixie Spray. This is a very light tack adhesive, and it just puts a kind of just a little bit of a tacky surface on the back of your stencil. So I'm spraying this on, letting it sit for about a minute, and then I can bring it over to my actual project. So I'm working on top of a Brutus Monroe medium mat, so it's going to make it super easy to blend. And then I'm going to place this stencil right over the top of my white panel. And I'm going to press it down with my hands to make sure those stripes are stuck and they're not moving. And then I'm going to flip this over and put a little bit of tape on the back just in case the stencil starts to move. I want to make sure that I have just a backup plan. You won't always need to do this with the pixie spray, but with these stripes being so delicate and thinly lined, I thought it would be a good idea. So as far as the color goes, I'm going to be using some navy mid-tone shadow ink from Hero Arts. This navy color matches the navy cardstock that I'm using that's called Nautical. It matches it really well, so I thought it would be a good, nice blue shade for this. I'm using a Ranger mini round blending tool to stamp the ink color directly on top of the stencil. After I stamp it down a few times, then I blend side to side so that it doesn't move the stripes up and down. I want to make sure that the stripes on the stencil stay exactly where they're at. So I did this over and over again, pouncing that ink over top of these areas and then swiping to the side just to make sure I get all the way up to the edge of each stripe. And after I had all of that ink applied, I was able to peel up the tape and then peel up the stencil from my panel. You can see that it sticks just a tiny bit, pulls off really easy. I love that pixie spray. I think it's my new favorite thing for stencils. I wanted to mention that this ink looked like it was going to stain this media mat from Brutus Monroe, but then I decided to try some Ultra Clean Stamp Cleaner from Simon Says Stamp, and that cleaned that up without a problem. So I'm moving on. I'm going to cut some foam to go behind these patterned panels. I'm using just some Simon Says Stamp Fun Foam, and I'm cutting these to 4 1/4 by 3 inches. That's just the perfect size to go behind these patterned panels. I'm using some Gina K Designs Connect Glue, and I'm going to scribble on the back of each one of these cardstock panels. Then I can put the foam right over the top. Then I'm going to apply some of that same glue over the foam. And the reason why I like to use liquid glue for this particular step is because it leaves a little bit of wiggle room in case you put it on your card base and it's not quite straight. You have a little bit of give to kind of move that around. Now you might remember from a video from a few weeks ago that you don't want to use a liquid glue on the back of ink blended pieces because if you have a reactive ink like a distress ink, sometimes the moisture from the ink can reactivate or the moisture from the glue can reactivate the ink. So just, be cautious when you're doing that. And then put some foam tape behind the greetings and then press those down directly onto the front of the cards. So that is my set of 3 thanks cards, all nautical themed. These are going to be great to give out to the staff on each cruise ship. I don't have a cruise planned for a few months, but I'll be sure to take these along with me. Thanks so much for watching today. You can catch all of these new products over at simonsaysstamp.com. And I also have 3 videos for you to check out. These are going to be my most recent videos, including some stencil inspiration. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in another video very soon.